coming to spring, we know spring is a season of change, and this is a time of year when a lot of us really start to think about change. Over the next few weeks, we're going to be entering into the process of preparing for the Easter season. And of course, Easter's the time we think of spring and flowers, and all the trees are going to be changing that went dormant. And also we have bunny rabbits and eggs, and I have no idea what the two have to do with each other, but it's so well accepted, we're not going to question it. So today, what we wanted to talk about is change. There's one thing in life that's certain, and that is that there's always going to be change. As you know, we're strong believers in the use of affirmations in our church, and so I'd like to invite you to share with me in this week's affirmation, and that is, I am willing to be changed. Affirmations are short statements that we use, and we say them as something we believe, not something we're asking for. We don't say an affirmation because we want it. We're saying it because we know it to be true. It's a statement that we're affirming. Just as during our collection, we use our affirmation because we know that to be true. That's a truth. We know that divine love through us blesses and multiplies our resources. So when we have our affirmations, we're just stating something and we're just claiming and knowing that truth. Because so many of us, we go through life, we go down the road in the various circumstances and situations, and when change comes along, we fight it so much and we get drug into it, kicking and screaming and very upset and fighting against it. And as we talked about earlier, the reality is that's the one constant thing in life is there's going to be change. So when we can get our minds and we can get ourselves to that place where we're willing to accept the change, where we're not fighting it, life becomes so much easier. Very similar to what we talked about last week when we talked about I will not judge. We talked about the freeing part of letting go of judging because we just don't care anymore. We're free. And just like we sang earlier this morning, we're free, we're unlimited. And by letting go of the things like judging and by letting go of you're fighting against change, you become so much freer and life becomes so much happier and such a much more wonderful place because you're not fighting, you're not struggling. And actually in change comes so much growth. So we know that the spiritual truths are some of the easiest concepts to understand, but the hardest to demonstrate. So when we talk about things like, you know what, I'm not going to judge, we know that's a good spiritual truth and it's easy to talk about, but it's hard to demonstrate. And we know about it's easy to sit up here and say, you know what, I'm going to accept that change and I'm not going to fight against it. But that's so much easier said than done. When the Garlishes established our church way back in 1927, one of their first founding principles was that the pastoral staff can't be compensated. We all have to work outside of the church. And, that's a great thing. And the ideology there is that you don't become dependent on the church for your living. You are out in the real world, and then you have more to bring in when you are delivering these messages. So anyways, and a lot of you know that I have a medical billing agency, and that's what I do for my work Monday through Friday. And it's so interesting over the years how I have been so resistant to change, because when we started, just a little while ago, I won't age myself and tell you how long ago that was, but, I was so used to doing everything on paper, every paper claim, and then all this stuff came along about, these electronic claims, and I remember being so resistant to it. No, I don't want to change because, there's I can't see those electronic blips, and I don't know, and there's so many fees associated. And, as I walked through that process, kind of kicking and screaming, it was just something I was really forced to do because clients wanted it, and a lot of carriers required it. And at the end of the day, now, it makes my life so much easier. Plus, it's so much less expensive because, some of these, we have to buy special envelopes and claim forms, and the postage is like $1.60 per claim. And now I pay about 25 cents to file an electronic claim. So it's such a savings. And this is an external thing. But to accept this in my mind, this change in what I was used to, this change in what I was accustomed to was so very difficult. It doesn't matter if you're up here leading the service or we're all New Thought students, and we all have that challenge that it's easy to talk about these New Thought principles and these dynamic laws and how if we adhere to them and how if we stick to them, our lives are so wonderful and beneficial. But living that is such a challenge. It's such a challenge, just like my analogy about getting across the Grand Canyon. We know it's simple. All you have to do is throw a rope across and go. But getting that rope across is really, really difficult. And so talking about it and understanding that it's good for us isn't as easy as demonstrating it. And so that's why we are New Thought students. We're always working on learning and learning to demonstrate and learning to lead these lives of demonstration. So when we talk about being willing to be changed, we're talking about that concept of not fighting it, not fighting the change, letting go and just letting it happen. Very similar also to what we talked about at the beginning of the year, and we had our handout last week about that great love experiment where we are seeing a circumstance or a situation in the light. We're just imagining that circumstance or situation in the light. We're not predetermining what we want to happen or how we want it to be resolved. We're leaving that to God because we know that He's so much more powerful than us. He knows a lot more than us. He sees the end of the story much better than we do. So we just leave it in His hands, not get in the way, not clog it all up with our own ideas and our own, endings to that story. Just see that particular circumstance or situation flooded in the light. Spend a couple minutes every day just visualizing this challenge, flooded in the light and love of God, and leave it there. Just get out of the way and let it happen. And indeed, we know that I'm really excited to talk with people at the end of our period and see the change that has happened. And as I mentioned, a lot of times that change may not even be the circumstance or situation. It's going to be the way that we look at that circumstance or situation. I had my brother who was very rigid. And when he had his children, of course, teenage children from a while back, they like to dye their hair green and get their ears and nose pierced and all kinds of other appendages. And, my brother was just so opposed to that because, he was very rigid and conservative. And so, the kids, because they always know so much more than their parents, as you all know, if you were parents, you know how your children are so much wiser than you, right? How they would sneak and get their, something pierced that couldn't be seen because they were going to get one over on mom and dad by, having their cake and eating it too. And of course, after it's done, there's very little you can do to undo it. And so I can remember that process of my brother just being so upset and just, it fractured this relationship with his son for a couple of years because he was just so upset about it and there was all this friction. And the reality was, first of all, it was done. There's nothing you could do. You know what? It's done. I mean, yeah, you can, take the earring out and eventually maybe it'll close up or it won't. But the thing is, it's done and it's really not that big a deal. If you sort of ratchet back and look at the big picture. I mean, he's not out robbing banks or stealing cars or doing God knows what, He got this piercing, and yeah, you know what, you weren't in line with that, but it really wasn't that big a deal. And so in that situation, if I had been able to express to him and explain to him the value of just willing to accept this change, being able to accept this change without all this fighting and kicking and screaming, and realizing that, by accepting this change, this is going to heal this relationship with your son, which at the end of the day is so much more important than whether, somebody has an ear pierced or green hair or whatever. As much as we may not like looking at that, the reality is, there are so many more important things like having a good relationship, especially in this day and age with children when, as I mentioned, there are so many other, horrific things that could be going on. Some little defacing of their, body probably isn't the worst thing in the world. Although, if you come from this really conservative slant, of course you think it is. And you aren't willing to be changed because you're fighting against it and you're kicking and screaming and it's just causing all this upset in so many areas of your life. When if you just let go and, as Elaine said last week, just let it be. If you just let it be, accept it, understand it, be changed, then there's so much more harmony in your life.